Good morning yet again.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for being here today. Last weekend, Beth and I were able to go to a little retreat in Sandy Cove. It's a little Christian retreat place. So we were able to get some time off away from trials, testing, and tribulations. And she's facing yet another week of those. So please pray for Beth and so that the doctors will be able to find what's going on with her and be able to give her the right prescriptions or whatever she needs. Today we are approaching the letter of James, and the first chapter of the letter of James is speaking about trials, testings, and how both of these affect our faith. Now, who is James? From the biblical writings, we don't really find out who James is. From the Christian fathers, we find out that he is actually brother of Jesus. There's a lot of Jameses in the Gospels. There's a lot of Jameses playing different roles in the book of Acts. And we know that Paul refers to James as one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. So we are assuming that this is the James that he's talking about. And I just want you to imagine being James. By the way, it's a trick question. Was James older or younger brother of Jesus?
Younger.
Okay, good. It was a trick question, so I'm glad you know the answer to that. Can you imagine being James and growing up with Jesus, and your parents tell you, "Well, James, why can't you just be like Jesus, your older brother? You know, he's God." Wouldn't that make you hate your older brother and kind of despise everything that somebody says about him? Well, that was in a way a trial for James his entire childhood and his entire youth. In fact, we know that James did not believe in Jesus being the Messiah until his death and resurrection, until Jesus' death and resurrection. Why do you think that was? Well, possibly because of, rivalry as a siblings, but also because growing up with somebody, we are so getting used to them that it's hard for us to imagine that they could have some kind of a higher purpose and higher position that is very unique and rivals with you as a sibling as being not only your older brother but also a son of God as opposed to son of Joseph. So James, in a way, was an unbeliever. I would say maybe agnostic before Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection, which actually made him believe. And we see that he not only converted to Christianity, but he also became a prominent leader because probably people were attracted to him trying to find out how Jesus was as a younger person before he actually came on the scene and ministered. We also know that this letter was probably written either in about 40s of our era, not 1940s, the 40s, 40 AD, because that was about the time of the Jerusalem Council, the famous council that decided the destiny of the Gentile believers, what they are supposed to be taught. Are they supposed to fulfill the Mosaic law? Are they supposed to abide by the Mosaic law and 613 commandments? Or do they have to abide by some other standards? It was either written in this time or it could not have been written later than 62 AD because we know that that was the year that James was actually martyred. He was killed. So this is about the time frame when this letter was written. So very early, I would say. One of the first letters of Apostle Paul, Galatians, was written probably around 65 AD. So which places this letter as one of the first letters to the newly formed church that carried Jesus' name and his teaching. What is this letter about? If you read letter of James, it's a very short letter, but it's also very profane, very wisdom filled. It doesn't flow like some of the other letters, let's say of Paul or Peter, where there's a beginning, middle, and the end, and everything is logically connected. It looks almost as if it's like series of different sayings, or maybe even series of smaller sermons piled up together and compiled into this letter. And in order to understand it, we have to kind of draw some parallels with the book of Proverbs and review this letter in its very unique light as one of the New Testament books of wisdom, or wisdom sayings by Jesus' brother. James calls himself in this letter, in its introduction, the first verse, a slave, or in some of the Bibles, bond servant of Christ. So he even doesn't equate himself with Jesus as his brother. He gets himself lower, recognizing Jesus' role as the Son of God, as the Messiah, and he's only able to claim to be his slave or servant. The letter is addressed to the 12 tribes. However, we know from history that after 722 BC, before Christ, 12 tribes were no longer in the picture. We know that 10 northern tribes were led into captivity, Assyrian captivity, and then later on in 586, 2 southern tribes were led into Babylonian captivity. When they came back under Ezra and Nehemiah, only the 2 southern tribes came back into Jerusalem or Judea. 10 northern tribes never came back. At least we don't read about it in the Bible. So all of these people were living in different countries, in different cultures. And that's who James is addressing in his letter. So when he says that they're in dispersion, that's who he is referring to. The scattered tribes of Israel that living among other Gentile nations that are not unified anymore in the land of Israel. And the first phrase of his command, or his encouragement, says this: "Consider it all joy, my brothers, whenever you encounter various trials." Now, what does it mean to consider it all joy? Well, there's a difference between joy and happiness. Joy in this context is much more deeper condition of the heart than just temporary feeling of happiness, or maybe some kind of emotional high that comes and goes. And he tells us to consider it all joy, wherever or whatever kind of trials come your way. Consider them all as joyful experience. But why? You know, for us people, it's countercultural to say that. Oh, when you have a trouble, and what kind of trials we might have, consider all joy. What kind of trials are out there? Well, let's say it could be some simple things that bother us. These are unexpected and unwelcome and unwanted things that come into our lives. That's what we most of the time call trials. Well, there are trials in general. There could also be specific hardships. In the time of James, it was most likely the persecution by the Roman government of the newly created sect that were called Christians, or followers of Christ. There could be trials of sickness. And all of us go through different sicknesses in life. My wife has gone through some sicknesses. All of us have gone through some kind of a sicknesses or illnesses in our life. And that was in itself a trial for us. There could also be trials of poverty. You know, when you have all these bills and you have no money to pay them all. Or you have a mortgage payment due and you don't have enough money. And many other trials that come in our way that are unwelcome, undesirable, and unexpected. But why does he say that we have to consider them to be all joy? Because he says all trials ultimately are testing our faith and they lead to endurance. What does that mean? What is endurance? And what does it mean that trials are testing our faith? How do they test our faith? Well, let's start with endurance. The word endurance in verse 3 expresses a growing determination in the face of adversity based on hope. Those who suffer can express joy during times of trial because of their confidence in the day in which Christ will vindicate them. Meaning that you can have a trial, and if you have enough wisdom to go through the trial and end up victorious, you know that sometime down the line, at the end of our lives, we'll receive a crown of glory. But it also, in verse 4, says that it would lead us to maturity and completeness. Now, what does that mean? How does trials can lead us to maturity and completeness? Well, trials are like in that song that we just sang, the refiner's fire, right? Refiner's fire is testing us with fire. So these trials coming to our life, they're setting up fire under us. We can't sit still. We have to do something. We are in pain. We are in trouble. We need help. We need to get over this situation. We need to resolve this situation before we can move on. If we don't resolve the situation in trial, guess what? That trial is going to come back again and again and again further down the line. Because that's how the Lord teaches us to grow in Him. So when the trials come in and we know how to handle them, or we learn how to handle them, we become mature. We become tested in our faith, and we become complete, meaning they will lead us to a certain completion of our growth process, of our spiritual growth. But also, James is mentioning here wisdom. Well, what do you mean I need wisdom for a time of trial? Can't I just pray and the trial will go away? You know, sometimes we just want the things to go away, right? We don't want to go through it. We want it to go away. Lord, take it away from me. I don't want any of that. You can have it. But guess what? The scriptures doesn't tell us that He is promising us to rid us of all the trials that we are going through. No. He will help us to go through the trials, and He will help us to guide us out of them by going through and overcoming whatever challenge we have. Not to get us out. That's never an issue. Otherwise, if we want out of this trial, guess what? It's going to come back at another date, at another time, probably with a vengeance, because you haven't learned your lesson the first time. You're going to keep on going through the same old thing. If you can't get along with somebody at your work, and you just quickly resolve the situation where, you didn't make peace with that person, you didn't even try to, you kind of just switched the department or did something else. Well, guess what? In the next job or in the next place, you're going to have the exactly same kind of person to deal with. And God is saying, you know what? You didn't want to deal with Joe, well, now you're going to deal with Craig or with somebody else, So you have to learn the lesson. Otherwise, there is no progress of growing or developing. If you haven't learned this lesson, you haven't grown. You haven't overcome. There are different types of wisdom in the scriptures. Well, let's just take a look at this word wisdom in its Hebrew context and find out what the Bible talks about when it comes to wisdom and what kind of wisdom we most likely are talking about in this context. Well, wisdom refers to the knowledge of God's plans and purposes and the ability to live accordingly. Wise people can identify the nature and purpose of their trials and understand how to overcome them. So if we lack wisdom, we won't be able to understand what nature of a trial it is and how to approach it and how to overcome it. Therefore, we need to ask for wisdom. Miles Custis writes in his article on wisdom, he says, Hebrew word for wisdom is hope.